program. Um, yes. Oh, yes. So thank you so much for joining me today, Laura. I know you're part of the Female Forward program. I just want to touch on a little bit before you entered the program.
Sure.
You had some notable projects that were already showcased. Um, how did you feel Female Forward could further hone your skills as a director?
Uh, for me, I really wanted to get into television. I had
Mhm.
done a handful of independent pilots, and I actually did a pilot with Gina Davis while I was in the process of applying for Female Forward. But it's really, really hard to get that first episode
Yeah.
and to break into network TV. And I kind of felt like I was in this hamster wheel of digital content, which was great, but I didn't know how to up level, And so I had actually spoken to an alumni from the very first class of Female Forward, Katie Locke O'Brien, and she highly recommended it. And she was like, it changed my career. Like it changed everything. Like that from, I'll never not be grateful. Like it literally changed my whole trajectory. So I was
Right.
like, all right, I'm going to apply to Female Forward. Cause it's, I'm a mom of two. At the time when I applied, I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And
Right.
it's just a rat race and it's a hustle. And the city of Los Angeles is expensive. And like, I just felt like, I still feel this way to be honest, but it's like the money would come in and it would just go right back out, like
Right.
preschool tuition and all these things. And, that's sort of I was constantly working, but working really, really hard. And I was like, I need to find a way to merge all this experience that I have from doing commercials and sketch comedy and documentaries and even on the acting side and photography side and just merge it all into directing television where I'm not, living in the scarcity mindset all the time and also fulfilling myself more creatively as well.
Wow. I you live in Los Angeles. I live in New
Yeah.
York, the city, so I totally get the crazy finances and the nuances of that. So thank you for being so honest with that. And
Yeah.
you've already kind of touched on my next question. Um, I wanted to know what some of your thoughts and your goals were for entering the program. You've definitely touched on them, but like specifically, what was your intentions and your goals for going into the program? What did you want to get out of it?
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm going to cough 1 second.
Yeah.
Getting over a cold. So that's why I sound a little bit like Marge Simpson. Um, I mean, for me, obviously directing, getting that first episode was huge, but then, beyond that, getting that second episode and that third and, changing the trajectory, that's what I wanted. I mean, it's thrilling to be a part of the paradigm that's shifting to include more female directors and, people of color and underrepresented minorities and all of that. So I'm like, just thrilled to be welcomed into that opportunity and into that equation. But yeah, I hope that it just keeps going from here and that I get to tell stories that are very similar to the one that I got to tell for American Auto. I'm super grateful that I got the episode that I got, that
Yeah.
it did handle, tackle like social issues and generational issues and gender issues and all of those things. And that's the content that I live for and strive on. So I hope that I get to keep working in that dark comedy, dramedy, comedy that's, willing to take a little bit of a risk, a little bit edgy. Those are the stories that I want to keep telling.
Awesome. Awesome. And I know the program is full of workshops that you have to take, right? So how has the workshops particularly shaped your essence as a director?
Hmm. Well, in full transparency, because I was, in the class of 2021, when we got in, all our workshops
Mhm.
were over Zoom,
Okay.
which was not normal. I don't think that they are now. But so that was, I think like its own unique journey, but to NBC and Female Forward's credit, they kept with it. And I think the workshops were, the same where you are having really specific, um, crafts for each one. So it would be like talking with the whole thing about post and talking with TV editors directors, and then a whole thing about cinematography and how to work with cinematographers as a guest director. I will say one of my favorite classes was something that we had actually as a class spoken up about and requested, and then Female Forward met the need, which was to have a whole workshop on scriptation, which is a app to go green. So instead of having a bunch of paper all the time on set and like wasting trees and scripts, because there's so many revisions in a script, like every day you might get a new script with different revisions, and it can be very wasteful. So there's a new app where you can put all of your notes in the script digitally, and then when there's a new script, it'll just transfer all of the notes over to the new script. It'll like locate the words and like literally take all your writings and photos and attachments and transfer them over. But it is kind of like learning a whole new thing. So we were like, can we have a class on scriptation? Like, we want to go green, we want to be, you know, more environmental, but it's very daunting to kind of learn a whole new program. And so NBC Female Forward was like, yeah, and got one of the people that like literally created scriptation to teach us how to use scriptation, what the different tools are, what the different icons are, what you can do with it. And so like that was so helpful. And then, you know, I had some smaller shoots leading up to it, and it was a great way for me to be like, okay, I'm going to take my iPad, I'm not going to be like, you know, pen and paper, and I'm going to use scriptation. And so then by the time I got to direct my episode, I was just using my iPad. You know, I was, you know, from the table read all the way through, only using scriptation. And I wouldn't have, I think I'm like a little bit of a Luddite with new technology sometimes. And I think I wouldn't have had the courage to be like, no, I'm good, I don't need a script, I'm totally digital. If I hadn't had that Female Forward workshop where someone literally sat down and was like, here's scriptation for dummies, we're going to walk you through it. I needed
wow. That's amazing. I'm really happy to hear that you guys went green with that. It's that there's so much paper. so
much paper. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that. And to my next question, what impact, and I know you've touched on this before, but what impact do you intend to make with the projects you take on and with your audience specifically?
Yeah, I've always been drawn to female narratives and you know, female-driven stories, and I've also always been drawn to bringing humor and comedy to unexpected topics. So it's just sort of what naturally winds up happening over and over with my stories and the projects that I'm drawn to, or that even find me. I've dealt with some uncomfortable topics, or, you know, some tenderizing subjects. I've worked in the arena of gun safety and fertility, the Holocaust, the incarcerated community, reproductive rights, all that stuff, but most often through the lens of humor. So for me, it's just like a way to approach something from a different angle and in a way that gets you thinking about it in a different way. It's not didactic, it's not dramatic, it's just like, and it's also healing and cathartic. I think that we process things differently when they're approached that way. And when you come at it from a little bit of like, you know, an angle versus straight on and like grip it hard. So for me, you know, I want to be a part of that paradigm shift where we are more comfortable having these conversations and not just sweeping things under the rug, but, you know, doing it in a way that's uplifting, doing it in a way that's healing, doing it in a way that's entertaining. That's what's important to me in my work.
Yeah, and I get that. And I think you touched on something very important. I think it is, there are some more important and significant things about going at it from a comedic angle that makes it a little bit more lighter. So definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that the episode does really well. And that's something that I credit the writer with, because, you know, there's so much fun to be had in woke culture. And she like used that to sort of gift wrap more complicated topics of, you know, abortion rights in the workplace, and, you know, a big corporate culture contributing to pro-life politicians and what that means. And also the, you know, the gender divide of, you know, should men be the ones in charge of coming up with the abortion policies for a corporation or not? But there was, you know, so much humor layered in that it didn't feel like tough medicine at all. It just felt like this like enjoyable authentic ride of like, oh yeah, of course, these kind of conversations are probably happening in the workplace. I'm sure they are. And I have a project that I'm working on that I just finished now that's going to be playing the film festival circuit, about growing up as a third generation Holocaust survivor based on my own experiences. And, I think that so many people have been like, wow, I've never seen anything that tackles the topic of the Holocaust through subsequent generations and like through the lens of dark comedy. Like that was so interesting. And now I'm thinking about it and what it means, and about cultural erasure and like how we connect with the dark parts of our history and our heritage in such a different way, because it isn't just coming at it like straight on and aggressively.
Gotcha. That is something that people don't think about, the generational aspects of the Holocaust. I'm excited to see that, when it's finalized.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think there's always humor, like I brought a comedy workshop to a bunch of incarcerated women, and they learned stand up and improv and performed it. And people were like, were they funny? And I'm like, the fucking funniest. Oh my God. And it was like the best, because instead of like going to a stand up show where people are like, oh, so I'm like, fighting with my roommate about which Netflix show to watch, they're talking about like gangs and drug abuse and parole. And like, it's so interesting and so funny. I mean, sometimes the darkest stuff is the funniest and the most healing, and like it's such a release to be able to like laugh about it and like move through it. I mean, they weren't just funny, they were brilliant, And so I think it's like, we got to break our boundaries on what we think can be handled with humor.
I'm just taking that in. Wow. These are things that I don't think about. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. What was the most important takeaway from the program? And I know it was different because of COVID, that you knew you had to apply when directing that episode of American Auto.
Biggest takeaway that I knew I had to apply. I think what that is. Honestly, I just felt a desire to do a great job. I was really grateful that I got into the program, and that, they took the time to, teach us, all these workshops and things. And I think there's something there's pros and cons to shadowing before you direct, because you are learning the lexicon of the show, you're getting to know the cast and the crew, you're seeing what other directors do. It's so helpful. And also they see you as a shadow. Like, do you know what I mean? Like everyone knows it's your first episode, and they get used to being like, oh, that's the shadow. And then a couple episodes later, you're like, oh, hey, I'm in charge.
Right.
And I think it's a little bit of a calibration for the crew and the cast, because they've seen you around, but they haven't really heard you talk that much. I mean, I took every opportunity I could in downtimes, lunch breaks, to like get to know people. But as a shadow, your job is to observe. I mean, literally like shadow, And so all of a sudden you go from being quite quiet and quite observant to being like, okay, action, I'm in charge. And it takes, I think, a little bit of like, even if it's subconscious, like a little bit of a calibration on everyone's part to be like, she knows what she's talking about.
Right.
And I can trust her. And I think I felt like I just had to, as far as what I took from the program into the episode, I just, taking the confidence and the skills that I had learned from the program, and just making sure that they translated on set so everybody could trust me, and everybody could make that calibration more seamlessly, and be like, yeah, she's in charge. Yeah, it's her first episode. We all know that, which isn't like, that's only going to happen once, right? You only get your first episode once. So everyone's kind of looking at you like a little bit like, all right, it's our first episode. How's it going to go?
Right.
Not in like a judgy way, but it's just the reality.
Yeah.
So, you just got to like take everything you've learned in your career and through the work, through the program, and be like, yeah, it's my first episode, and you're in great hands.
Right. Wow, that makes sense too. I think you really put it in perspective. Like the first episode after training for so long is always like, okay, this is what I learned right here.
Yeah.
So I get it. And this episode was about a lot of the like the generational dynamics in the
Yeah.
co-working space. So can you just touch on what those generational dynamics were that were highlighted in the film?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the episode, Catherine, who is the CEO, uh, has to go on a listening tour after a group of the much younger employees, like the Gen Z employees, demand that the company stop contributing to pro-life politicians.
Mm.
Um, and then in the middle of that is Sadie, who is more in that millennial generation. So there it was very nuanced. And then there was also Dory, who like considers herself like a young millennial, whereas she kept like, putting Sadie in the older millennial category. And the show really sort of makes fun of how each generation handles things like the patriarchy, honestly. I mean, Catherine's point of view was like, I paid my dues. I had to like, elbow my way through like all of these men. I wasn't given any break as a woman. I had to like kick and fight to get to this position of being a female CEO. And now she's the enemy in these like Gen Z eyes. And she's like, they have no idea what I went through. They have no idea what I fought for to get here. And then, from the perspective of the youngest employees, they're all like, you're the CEO, you make the changes, zero tolerance for anything that isn't just like 100% the most liberal policy for the company. So yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't comment on who's right and who's wrong, but there are, I think, even as women, and we're all on the same team, on the same side, but there is this generational perspective that's different from like my mom to me. You know what I mean? It's like we're all, because of what we've gone through. I mean, even Catherine is not playing a grandma by any means, but like the other day, a friend was talking to me about like what a like, mean woman his grandmother was. And then I started asking questions like, what was her childhood like? What did she go through? Blah, blah,
Right.
blah. And it's like, of course she was mean. Like, listen to this. Like, you're telling me she had like 5 kids, like whatever it is. It's just like, like it's women had, the history of women has changed so much, even in the last 100 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, this woman like didn't have rights. Like she like grew up not being able to vote. Like, of course she was like spicy as F in her like final years. Like you can't take away the generation that we're raised in. It's just becomes intrinsically who we are. So Catherine's point of view as a woman and how she's fought her way through the patriarchy is going to be completely different than like a 22-year-old, and neither is wrong, but like, how do we bridge the gap to continue to say, hey, yeah, we are all on the same team.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Thank you for putting that into perspective and highlighting those things. You actually kind of went into my next question a little bit, and I was going to ask you about like the tensions between those generational dynamics and women's rights, and why do you feel as a director it's significant to highlight those tensions? If you can touch on that a little further.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, like the episode is so smart because it's commenting on conversations that are happening in real life. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully the episode also provokes more conversations that are happening in real life. It's this constant, back and forth between media and art and life and reality. And I think like there is a little bit of this meta thing happening where, it was a female written episode, female directed episode. I think, in the grand scheme of things, me and Elena Cravello, the writer, are considered like, maybe like, younger, like the millennial generation or whatever, to be like at the helm of that episode. So we're trying to like prove our, worth as a writer and a director and helming this. And at the same time, there's the women in Paint and Motors trying to prove their worth and like find their footing and like figure out, how to get people to trust them. So I think there is something kind of like meta happening on like behind the scenes,
Right.
as well as like what's in the episode. Sorry, I feel like I'm not fully answering your question. It was,
No, you are.
yeah, but I mean, I think like my point is, I guess, is that like every day being a female director, whether you like it or not, you're in a small percentage. There aren't that many of us.
Right.
So whether you like it or not, you're being a part of a paradigm shift and you're like moving the needle a little bit every day towards like creating more opportunities for that. So for me, that's part of my story just intrinsically. So to tell stories of other women moving the needle or trying to find their footing in a place where they're, maybe a little bit in hot water or a fish out of water or whatever it is, like that's just super aligned because that's like literally what I feel like every day.
Right. Yeah. And thank you. I think you did touch on that. You did answer that question because I think before I had asked about more specific to the episode, and this is the way you answered it was more big picture of where what you're going through when your coworkers and peers are going through as well as what's happening in the episode. So thank you for that. I know we're running out of time. So my last question for you is, after coming out of the program with your experience and then airing the episode with NBCU, what do you hope to see more of in film for yourself as a director, as well as for your peers?
What really excited me about the episode is that we were able to tackle the topic of abortion and abortion rights in the workplace on network TV. I cannot tell you how many people were like, oh my God. I was like, oh, they're going there. Oh, wow. Like people that didn't know what the episode was going to be about. They're just like, oh, I wanted to watch your episode. Maybe they weren't fully filled in and they were like, okay, all right. Like, that's cool. And so many people have reactions like that. And I love that because it's like, I think that network TV can get a bad rap for being like overly safe or, just like really trying to cater to like the middle of the road. And I love that Justin Spitzer and the writers pushed for this. They pushed for this to happen. And it wasn't, the smoothest road.
Right.
And I commend NBC and Universal for saying, yeah, okay, let's do this. It's okay to take a hot button topic that's super current and like in the zeitgeist right now with like many heated conversations about it. And we're going to talk about it on our show with our characters that people love and are attached to. And we're going to talk about it on network TV. And that means that 2 million people are going to see it, whatever it is, like that's so cool. Like what a neat way to like bring this topic to the masses. Or whatever. That was like, I guess, sorry, there's my coffee machine beeping that it's no longer heating. That was how people watched it that night. I mean, who knows how many people have watched it since then. So, I think like I would just love to keep working on shows that are willing to take some risks. And I'm seeing it all the time. I mean, whether it's like about there's so many just interesting things through the female gaze, like whether we're talking about like eating disorders or, anything like alcoholism, divorce, like all these difficult topics. I'm now seeing told actually through a comedic lens and like from a more female gaze, like not like a woman is a victim, male gaze storytelling, which we were fed so much in like the 80s and the 90s. Like, no, this is the anti-hero. Like she's a shero, she's just a woman and she's flawed, but she's also having this midlife awakening and going after what she wants in the world. And like, let's watch her journey through her perspective. And I'm just want to keep diving into more of that. Like that really, really excites me. And I'm like, so excited that culturally and artistically, there's so much of that out there in the media, tons of it on cable TV. The more it spills into network TV and we blur the lines between cable and network, the better, in my opinion.
Awesome. Well, Thank you so much, Laura. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. I learned so much, and just good best of luck. You don't need it, but best of luck for whatever you do in your projects.
Oh,
I'll see more from you.
thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.